Welcome everyone to Yellow Card Vanguard. Toku and Zystral here bringing you some commentary. So as some of you may or may not know, I hosted a VGCS here in the UK last month, and we finally got around to getting some commentary on the games that we've recorded. So to remind everyone who may or may not have known, this was a cross-format trios event, meaning that each member of the teams were playing a different format. So we're going to upload most of the rounds of Swiss and the top 4 for you to watch, and you're going to see the format changes every time between D, Standard, and V. But we're starting here with round 2, and we've got Standard. So on the left is Magnolia, and on the right, as you can see, is Prison. I'm sorry to the players, but I don't quite remember their names, so if this is you, feel free to let us know down in the comments, and we'll put your names in afterwards. But yeah, we're just going to jump straight into it.
I think the really interesting thing to start off our commentary with is Prison versus Magnolia. These are both decks that are basically two different sides of the same coin. One is very reliant on its pieces on the field, and the other, being Prison, is very reliant on being able to remove said pieces and putting them into the prison. Knowing that, and knowing your current knowledge of the matchup, Zystral, what do you think has the upper edge in this matchup?
So I think Magnolia is ever so slightly favored. As you say, like, it's two sides of the same coin. But the great interesting thing is we've had the DPTO4 meta in Japan for a while now. And at the beginning, Prison very quickly solidified itself as being one of the best decks in the game, because Pure Light is obviously a very, very powerful card. But we know that then Magnolia started coming up to try and fight it, because apparently Magnolia was supposed to be favored into Prison. And the reason this is the case is because even though Prison's very good at removing board and locking down the opponent's plays, Magnolia has so many ways of getting that board back and refilling, and just putting more of an aggro than Prison can handle.
I can definitely see that, and then we actually see on the left-hand side, Magnolia was able to go first, and actually opting to use the Zorga ride line here with the Chain Ranker, hoping to get that small plus by being able to, if we did draw an order, this would be effectively be a Soul Blast 1, draw 1 to hand. Most importantly as well is the fact that Prison going second means that they don't have a free unit to rest in their Vanguard for the Prison skill, which means they'd have to commit another card down from their hand to get that Prison active, as well as to be able to get an attack off this turn as well.
Yeah, although that's not really much of a problem because Magnolia doesn't have that much board control. So you see here, oh, he's dropping a PG though. That tells me that he doesn't really have much else in his hand that he wants to be dropping down this early on. So that could be problematic. Although at the same time, PGs
those soul charges were pretty rough.
Unfortunate soul charges, but at the same time, the thing about dropping the PG there is, as we know, Magnolia is doing like 5 to 6 swings a turn, all of which are only like 5 to 10k shield. So in a way, the PG actually loses value in this matchup because you're dropping 2 cards for an attack you can probably guard with just 1 card.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well. Especially, it looks like we had a peek at the hand, and it looks like it was very trigger heavy. So having that PG down to actually boost probably actually gives it a lot of value. We do see one of the Pure Lights going to damage, and then we also see that because the Magnolia player was not able to find that order in the early game to be able to dump off with Ranker Chain, the Dragon does not get them that extra +1 back on the right as well. So looking to be a very vanilla thing on the left-hand side of things, we will see Prison be able to ride up into grade 2, going into the Resat Pink, and hopefully getting a small hand rip into the Prison.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of the more important turns for Prison, because as we know, Prison has to wait until turn 4 to ride Pure Light to get real Prison engine going. So its first grade 3 turn, where it's just on the regular Seraph, it's not really doing much. Whereas Magnolia, it can just start committing pieces to the board, and assuming they don't all go away, it can just refill with its Elder Magnolia ride and then start going for it. So we see here Prison's dropping the Macarite, which is really important for A, getting the early Prison, and B, putting forward that early tempo, as we said. He's got the Cuff Spring as well, which again doesn't hurt the Magnolia play in terms of card advantage, but it accelerates the Prison, and it's just another 10k attacker, so 5k shield that the Magnolia player needs to give up or risk taking a bunch of damage.
I think what's most important to note is that a lot of these Prison cards that start putting stuff into the Prison is fairly resource cheap. Soul Blast, Macarite was also very cheap. So we're able to keep the counterblast that we need for a lot of our other cards, such as Seraph's Skill, as well as Cheval Stud. but at the same time still able to accelerate our prison, just like you said. That way, like going into their next turn, sometimes we don't even need to counterblast one to get the 3 prison we need for Seraph's extra drive.
So that was a really unfortunate heal there from the Magnolia player. I think the prison player's attack order was a bit wrong. Like, maybe they're playing fronts, in which case they should attack with Vanguard first, but knowing that both the 2 rearguard attacks were shut down by a single trigger probably meant that the Vanguard should have attacked last. That way you're still getting value there. And you see here, Magnolia's just got all the time in the world now. It hasn't put anything from hand. It's had a few things in prison, but it can just get those resources back straight away. And it has 1 counterblast. If it wants to start doing stuff, it can also do that now. You see he's got the Spiritual Body Condensation. It's going to go for a little bit of a plus. And what I like about this early aggressive prisoning from the prison player is that on this turn 3, when the Magnolia player doesn't have Elder, they have to make this decision of, am I going to start committing pieces from hand to get this aggro on because I have a turn 3 aggro but prison doesn't? Or am I going to start burning some resources to free my stings from prison? And you see he's got the grade 2 that calls another copy of itself, which is a very important card for filling up a board out of nowhere, but at the same time, he's leaving cards in prison, which is good for the prison player when it gets to turn 4.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the major role players in this deck right now, in Stoicheia be it, is that card we see in the back there, the Inlet Dragon. Originally designed for Flagberg, but being used by Magnolia just that much more better in accordance with Magnolia's back row attack, but also the fact that Inlet Dragon is just able to go into soul if there's been 4 attacks this turn. Doesn't matter where from, doesn't have to be in the front. So just like what we're seeing here, Magnolia is going to be able to give the effect to attack from the back to the inlet to refill the soul and to get a card back, as well as to keep up the tempo.
Yeah, but as we see, the defensive there from the prison player means that it's not really doing much. I mean, he takes the damage anyway, but it wasn't like the big aggro push we should be expecting from Magnolia. And he's leaving pieces on the board, which prison player, Rise into Seraph, counterblast 1, gets a free 2 more prison. That could be really threatening. So I think this is going to be a huge turn here where the prison players is going to counterblast 1, prison 2, have the triple drive, still have bodies on the board, and I think it's just going to be too much card advantage deficit for the Magnolia player to come back from, even though he has really good aggro.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the main thing to mention as well, is that it's not card advantage onto the prison player side of things, it is the card advantage deficit on the Magnolia's player side of things. Because now they've got to use their lack of soul, since they've decided to soul blast most of their cards the last turn, and they are basically going to have to tank a lot of this damage to get the counter blast required to pull all the cards out of prison out.
Yeah, of course Magnolia doesn't use that much counter blast, so it's not the end of the world, but at the same time it's, there's a lot of stuff going on that they want to be freeing cards from prison as much as they can to avoid the massive crit buff from Pure Light, and guarding that, not guarding that aggressively this early on can be problematic when you reach, say, turn 5, turn 6, where Pure Light has reached the 10 prison crit buff because you don't have any more resources to free things from, and then you can't afford to take any of these attacks because you're on 4 damage and they're all 2 crit base. So that could also be... That's the decision I would be facing as Magnolia player. Do I want to guard aggressively now and be unable to free prison so that I can then tank some 2 crit attacks later on? Or do I want to just play fast and loose now and just stop the prison player from pulling too far ahead?
And we do see from the prison player's end of things, one of the power cards of DBT04 for the prison deck in Aurora Battle Princess Suppressed Glimmer. Similarly, just another card that calls another copy of itself onto the board, but basically by playing this deck, these are 13k bodies that just stay as 13k bodies.
Yeah. These are some really interesting commitments to the board here we've seen from both sides. We saw the Magnolia player last turn. He made his columns in such a way that if he had put his Flagberg in the front, it still would have hit, and then the grade 2 would have been able to hit with the power buff from the back row with Magnolia. And so we saw that last turn, Magnolia had to swing at both the prison's rear guards, which is not great. And we're seeing here, the prison players decided to call the second grade 1 to his left column underneath the taser, whereas he could have put it in the front row on the empty column so that he could swing, obviously not through a defensive as we saw, but it would have been 13, whereas this Shovel stat now just doesn't do anything, whereas instead it could have boosted the taser for a bit more pressure. So I think both players here have lost basically they've given up an attack they could have reached otherwise, but at the same time the damage is now fairly even. But we're seeing now between the triple drive and between making a board out of nowhere, the Prison player just has way more cards to play with, and the Magnolia player is going to be forced to commit here, because if they try and free too much out of Prison, they won't be able to do anything next turn, and if they commit from a hand, then they're just walking right into a big Pure Light.
Yeah, exactly. Now we do see that the Magnolia player is able to run into the Elder, going to be able to call the Inlet out of Soul, going to be able to reuse its skill once again to hopefully try and retain some more cards in hand to be able to fend off Pure Light when it comes to next turn. But then we do need to see what they plan to do about that very large Prison that they need to free up. They do have the 2 Counterblast to play with, opting to use at least 1 Counterblast to call 2 cards out. We do see the Gnosla come out, and we actually see 2 Gnoslas come out.
I think that's not too bad. The problem is you don't want to call, I forget its name, but the other grade 2 because it costs Soul. And right now, the Magnolia player's only Soul is the grade 3 Magnolia, which they cannot afford to get rid of. So in fact, I'm interested to see here, how can this Magnolia player get an extra Soul? Because at the end of turn, Inlet Pulse will go back in, so they'll have 2 Soul, being the Inlet Pulse and the Magnolia. Oh, there we go. So they've got the Dragon there, which can also go to Soul at the end of turn. But the reason they need at least 3 Soul is because Pure Light will rip 2 cards out of the Soul, and like I said, this Magnolia player cannot afford to let that grade 3 Magnolia come out of Soul.
Exactly. Definitely needs to keep that grade 3 Magnolia in Soul for like their for their next upcoming turns as well. Otherwise, they just don't have any kind of offensive pressure in the next turns. And then with that, the Pure Light deck is just going to be able to slowly rip the game out from under their hands.
Yeah, another huge heal coming in there for the Magnolia player. But again, I feel like his columns could have been slightly more effective in how he's put them up. Like, for example, he could have pushed the Ginzola forward and then had his promos in the back row, the grade 2s that don't hit on their own, so that more of his attacks are pressuring. And of course, the Prison player is just taking all of these anyway, which is very curious. But I feel like if you were going to take them, you would have taken the Vanguard swing and then hope for a defensive, which would ton a bunch of Magnolias, right?
Mm-hmm.
We see he's very low on hand. He's actually burning the OT here just to guard these attacks.
And then we've also got 2 more attacks coming in as well.
Yeah, you've seen
actually
the last 2 cards
opting
in
to
his
use,
hand, PG and Pure Light, and he definitely doesn't want to get rid of the Pure Light, so is he gonna... We might to see him burn the last PG here. I think he has
we'll have to.
Yeah.
I think, burning the last PG and then hopefully using Pure Light to go ahead and wrench the game out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We are at the 10 in Prism for the Pure Light skill to be active.
Yeah.
And it looks like Rich is going for like a windmill slam here, just trying to a big Hail Mary to try and get the game back. Because it looks like they just took way too much damage that last turn. Maybe their hand was just not as healthy as we had thought to be able to guard 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 attacks from the Magnolia side of things.
Yeah, so just to explain you may have seen like a quick skip or fade in the video. That's because the camera we're using only records in 10-minute bursts, but this was just it resetting. So I think we skipped ahead there. We just basically saw the attacks finish, we saw the PG come down, and then the Magnolia player just resolved all of their insult effects. And it looks like Prison player just rides Sarah Pure Light, imprisons 2, and then uses Cheval Stud to imprison the last rear guard that was left on the board. And yeah, he's just going for this big swing here, but I don't think it's going to be enough. Like, again, his rear guards aren't threatening enough, and he's only 3 attacks at the end of the day. And this, no matter what happens here, Magnolia player only being on 2 damage means that he can afford to take at least one of these attacks. So you're not even putting up that you're not even setting up that massive hand deficit that we talked about. You're ripping like maybe 1 or 2 cards out of their hand at best.
Mm-hmm. We do see a very nice heal coming out onto the Prison player's end of things. Gives them at least that 1 more damage to play with on the next turn, 1 more damage that they're able to tank, hopefully get a good defensive, and once again try and just sneak another round out. But I don't believe we saw a Seraph drive check there. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't think so. And
which means that this is their last like big offensive turn.
Yeah, so even if he survives this, it's going to be really tough for him. So, like I said, Magnolia player can afford to take damage, but they have enough cards that they can just guard this anyway without having to rely on defensive. So this Taser column does hit through a defensive, which is one thing to consider. But again, he's only on 2. Even if this is 2 damage, he goes to 4, and then spends all that counterblast freeing his units from Prison. And like I discussed last time, because he was able to get that second piece of soul, Pure Light was not able to imprison the grade 3 Magnolia from Sol, so the Magnolia player still has all the gas they need to get going. So at this point, they could just counterblast 2, 3, 4 units, and they're just off to the races. And this
So
is
we
exactly
see
what
our
we're talking
first choice of unimprisoning here. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is what we're talking about, how Magnolia is almost a direct counter to Prison, because they just have the early aggro that Prison struggles to deal with, and then they're not using counterblast as aggressively, so they can just free a bunch of things from Prison without having, which kind of makes up the deficit anyway. So let's just double check how Hazer works. So when you counterblast one to free 2 things from Prison at the same time, Hazer goes off on both of them, and then the Prison player can choose which one of those 2 they can imprison, if at all. So I think he's choosing the Jinzola, which is a smart choice.
Going to go see another unimprisoning here. Now, I want to beg the question. We do see that the Prison player did opt to attack with the Taser, which had that extra crit from the Pure Light skill. Do you think there's ever a world where we don't attack and give the Magnolia player less resources to play with? Less counterblast to free out their units, force them to call more from hand, and just kind of like choke them out of the game slowly and slowly until you are able to get like a really good triple drive off of the Pure Light to try and go for like a 1-turn kill.
Yeah, no, I like that plan a lot, especially because we saw that the Magnolia player perfect guarded the Seraph attack. I would consider even pulling back the Shovel Stud and putting a grade 2 down. Just say, I'm going to hit you with this grade 2 as well. If you're going to guard, and we saw the Magnolia player did guard the Shovel Stud, if you throw it on the grade 2 as well, you could have just said, well, now I have an intercept, and now you have to deal with this. 2 huge fronts coming in. This might be it. I think it was a 2 to pass anyway, and it breaks through. No defensive from the Prison player. This has been very unfortunate so far, but Magnolia is now in a massively good position there. They've got everything they need. Jinzola's hitting. Gonna give power to one of probably the back row. No, he's gonna give it to the front row that already had the front.
Yeah, it already has a double front.
Yeah.
But it looks like we're banking on the fact that the 2 double fronts are unable to be guarded at all. We know that the OT is out. Oh, and it looks like we do have another copy of Pure Light in hand. Unfortunately, though, still not enough to guard. We are going to see the 6 damage come out onto Seraph's side of things. Good game.
Yeah, so, going back what we saw, it was a lot of, like I said, Magnolia got the early pressure. Prison, despite the early prisoning, just wasn't able to make value out of that grade 3 turn. I think, like I said, because they put together their columns maybe a bit more suboptimally, they could have maybe ripped an extra card out of the Magnolia player's hand. And like you said, once you see that your opponent perfect guards the Seraph attack, you've got your drive checks, you're happy. You can then just starve them with counterblast, right? He could have just not attacked the other 2 columns and just slowly buried the Magnolia player under this insurmountable wave of card advantage. Because if Magnolia wants to play the game next turn with no counterblast, they have to commit pieces from hand. In which case, you just say, alright, well, those pieces are gone as well now, goodbye.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely probably one of the big turning points of the game, was deciding to attack with that last attack.
Yeah, definitely. And even though the Magnolia player, as you saw, was off to a rocky start, despite playing the Zorga ride line, they were still able to just keep enough units on the board because they had the resources they need to free things from Prison, because Magnolia is not that counterblast heavy of a deck. But yeah, that's going to be the end of the first game. Like I said, this was just round 2. There's a total of 5 rounds of Swiss, followed by a top 4. So those will be up very soon, and we'll see you next time on Yellow Card Vanguard. Take care.
Bye.